What led to this postponement?
Well, it's very, very clear that the parties in the GNU are not yet settled on the budget that would speak to a growth, jobs and economic advancement agenda. There were some concerns around some of the proposals in the current budget that members of the GNU felt were not in line with the growth agenda in South Africa. And so our interactions as parties to the GNU decided to postpone today's budget and to come back to Parliament with a budget that we think better reflects the growth and jobs agenda, and which also takes into consideration the plight of the people of South Africa who are suffering under an incredibly high cost of living crisis, a huge unemployment crisis. And what we want to do is to come back with a budget that will answer all of those questions, but also give South Africans hope that there is now a big move forward under the Government of National Unity to fix the economy, to create jobs, and to ensure that we can combat the high cost of living.
Was the contestation over the VAT?
The VAT was, of course, one of the matters, and I think that's been played out in the media over the last few weeks, last week, and it obviously was a very key point for me, if I wear my hat as the leader of my party. Very clear position from my party that we couldn't in good conscience support a 2% VAT increase given the current economic circumstances in South Africa, and that we need to look at more innovative ways that are more pro-growth to be able to get the economy moving, to create jobs and to end the poverty. Those are the key determinants of the medium-term development plan and objectives of them, and we need a budget that speaks to those key objectives. And I think it's a healthy sign that there are now different voices around the table, and that those voices must find each other now before a budget is tabled, and it's not just a my way or the highway situation, and that other parties' views and opinions need to be taken into consideration, and I think that's a healthy sign. So while it's not the most ideal situation today, I think it is absolutely the right decision that's been made so that we can come back with a budget that's going to have buy-in and support of all of the parties into the GNU, and which we can all get behind, and in doing so get South Africa behind it.
What does a pro-growth budget look like for South Africa, particularly in regards to VAT? What direction does that go?
A pro-growth budget doesn't hurt the poorest of the poor. A pro-growth budget doesn't increase the burden on the middle class. A pro-growth budget looks at those key elements that are required and reforms that are required to get the economy moving forward in a more bold way.
So it lowers VAT, it keeps VAT at current levels?
Well, it certainly doesn't raise VAT to a position where South Africans are no longer able to afford, and they cut back on expenditure, and then you end up with inflationary pressures as a result of that. What we need to be doing is taking the big, bold decisions that are going to be required to move the country forward. That's going to mean some reforms. We're going to have to be more assertive around port concessions, around rail concessions. I think that the world and investors locally and South Africans now expect bold, determined action. I think we've had 2 to 3 decades of promises of jobs, promises of growth, but those things don't materialize by wishing them into being. They are determined by medium-term development plans and budgets that speak to those. And I think it's a responsible decision that's been taken today. I think the Minister of Finance has made a responsible decision. I think the GNU has made a responsible decision to go back and come back and present South Africa with a budget that South Africans can look at and see, I can now see the pathway to growth. I can see the pathway to jobs, and I can see the pathway to a better economy for my country.
John, are you confident that the conversations will happen in good faith, or are you concerned that you might not find each other?
Well, I think they will have to take place in good faith, because that's how coalitions and governments of national unity work. It's around a different set of voices. And of course, there will have to be compromises on all sides. That's how these things work. But the reality is you've got to pass a budget. It's got to be passed by a majority in the House. And if you don't have the numbers to pass a budget, you can, with the best will in the world, you're not going to get it through. And I think there was a very real prospect that we could have ended up with a budget that not all parties would have supported. And that would have meant it doesn't pass. So let's rather go back, be responsible, be good stewards of the finances of the country, and be good stewards of the future of the country, and go back and come back with something that will credibly set out the path for growth going into the future.
Do you agree on retrenchment of public servants?
There was no discussion about the granular issues there, but I think there is an acceptance across the board that we do need to reduce the size of the civil service, that we do need to reduce the size of government, and these are the bold reforms that other countries are undertaking. If one looks at what countries who are in similar brackets to us, like Argentina, they're not tinkering around the edges. They're making the bold decisions that are made. And you can say what you like about Mr. Millet, and you can say what you like about his reforms, but they're bringing inflation down in Argentina, and they are starting to grow the economy. We similarly need, I think, far more bold action in South Africa to get our economy moving, and that is what the GNU is committed to doing. The president, all the parties in it have said, we want to grow the economy, we want to create jobs, we want to end poverty. If we want to do that, we've got to have a budget that speaks directly to those three objectives, and I think that's why the responsible decision has been made today to take this back. Let's sit around the table and come back to South Africa with a plan that speaks to our objectives.
So the
John, will today's event be that it wasteful?
Pardon?
Will today's sitting, the postponement?
It's not ideal, and obviously we want to reduce this, but I think there would have been far more. There would have been a far higher cost had we just simply proceeded today, from both a socio-economic perspective, but also from a financial perspective for many South Africans who would have probably woken up tomorrow to a 2% hike in VAT and the concomitant rise in cost of living, inflation on things happening. And so I think if one weighs those things up, I think, and we of course we weigh those things up when we make decisions like this, but it has to be balanced against compared to what? Compared to another full year of potential pain for citizens. Does the cost of a single parliamentary sitting, compared to that? I would argue not.
Minister Steenhuisen, you can imagine that the foreign investment community has been watching this day quite closely, just given the events that happened in the build-up to it, most notably the fractured relations, as it were, with the US. What do you say to them about the state of the GNU? Is it in crisis or jeopardy, sir?
No, it's not. It's working, and today is a very good example of how it's working. You have a variety of parties sitting around a table deciding on the way forward for the country. That includes voices that have not been at the table before. Bear in mind, it was a budget crisis that brought the German coalition to an end. Here we have a different situation. Here we have the GNU sitting with its finance minister, having a rational and reasonable discussion with each other, putting each other's views and opinions on the table, and a responsible and mature decision being said, well, rather than now just try and bulldoze something through, which clearly doesn't have buy-in and support and needs some work, let's rather go back and see how we can find each other. I think any observer should be taking great heart in the fact that this has happened today, because it is finally showing that in South Africa we have a group of parties now that are in government and are in charge, and it's through their collaboration that the good decisions, the wise decisions, and the financially sound decisions will be made to make sure that the economy is stewarded through what has been a very difficult time and into far safer waters, underpinned by growth, prosperity, opportunity, and of course more sound fiscal principles.
John, just a quick final one. Does reducing government also include reducing cabinet members, the number of cabinet members that we have? Because that's quite bloated as well.
Well, I don't appoint the cabinet or disappoint the cabinet. You'll have to ask the president. Of course, yeah, of course.
And we've forward during your deliberations as well.
Well, I'm sure there'll be a variety of things that can be looked at. But I mean, I think you're tinkering around the edges there. I mean, what you really need to do is to get to grips with some of the big constraints to growth that are holding us back. Of course, I mean, we'd rather like to see a smaller cabinet, but the reality is you've got a 10-party GNU, and it has to be accommodated. So, like anything, there's trade-offs that have to be made. What we can do, and what we have been doing, is looking at how we can reduce the cost of government to make it lower. So, for instance, I've refused to take new cars. I'm driving ministers' cars from 2 ministers ago that have got over 200,000 kilometers on the clock. I know it's not good enough for Mr. Trollop and Action SA, but nonetheless, I think it's a commitment that we're not going to waste money on new cars. We'll use what we've got and try and make do with that. So whilst the cabinet may be larger, we have to look at innovative ways to be able to shrink that and make it smaller.
John, one of your members of the deputy minister, John, one of your members of the deputy minister of finance, how closely involved was the party in the formation formulation of this budget?
Well, we were absolutely involved in the formulation of the budget up until about 2 weeks ago, when this VAT thing was put on the table. And obviously, it's been a main casus belli, bone of contention within there. And so I think there does need to be far more consultation within the cabinet, and I think that's what's going to take place, and that's why the postponement's been set up today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So does this mean there's no budget at this stage? And so what's the way forward now with this whole process?
So
the GNU partners now sit around the table to discuss.
So I think the finance minister has listened very carefully to what the parties have said around the table. I think they're going to go back. We're going to have consult more. Ministers themselves are going to have to come up and determine, where cuts can be made, but also how we can grow. Budget shouldn't just be about cuts and about tax. It should be about growth. I think that's what we need to focus on.
And obviously, was the VAT raise one of the biggest concerns for you?
Of course, VAT a big concern, and from our side as the DA, I made it very clear this was an untenable situation for us. We could not, in good conscience, support a budget with a 2% VAT increase. But it does mean now we've also got to be part of the solution in finding where the cuts need to come and where the growth needs to come in, and that's what we've committed to doing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey, Joseph.
In terms of reducing the number of government employees, was that an issue that arose at all?
No, it's not an issue. I said we didn't really get down to the granular details, and that I'm sure will happen during the next negotiations. But I think there is an acceptance that early retirement is a way to reduce the wage bill in a way, and allow you to have options to get it under control. If we're going to reduce the size of government, we obviously have to find ways that do it without compromising service delivery, particularly on frontline service. But I do think there are areas of government where there is bloat, and the far more cutting could be looked at being done rather than burdening our citizens with more tax through VAT.
And there is talk that this issue has been going for a while. I heard Minister Mackenzie speaking about 2 weeks of negotiations. How come the minister came all the way to today without a proper agreement?
Well, I think you'd have to ask the minister that. I mean, we've made our views very clear right from the beginning on this particular matter. It's not new, and we've been submitting particular amendments and changes and things we would like to see in there. But I'm hoping that we'll be able to find our budget that's really going to speak to growth, jobs, and the economy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Oh, thanks. Okay. Excellent. Well, they're all right.
Yeah. Super on this.
Today was certainly a historic and unprecedented day in South Africa's politics, but this is the new politics, the new normal of the government of national unity. For the very first time, obviously, the budget's been postponed, but for a very good reason. The Democratic Alliance felt that the budget in its current form did not speak sufficiently to growth and jobs, but instead was far too focused on cuts and taxes. We need more jobs, not more taxes. And we said very, very clearly that a budget that contained a 2% VAT increase would not enjoy the support of us, and we would not be able to vote for it in Parliament. A responsible decision has therefore been made to postpone today's budget tabling, to be able to go back to allow the government of national unity partners to try and find each other on how we can put on the table a pro-growth budget that helps stimulate the economy, create jobs, and help to fight poverty and the cost of living. A 2% increase in VAT would have been completely retrogressive, would have meant even more burden on existing South Africans at home who are already struggling under the weight of a massive cost of living. Every time people went to the tills and saw their till slips after a 2% increase, they would be reminded that this was a government that was not really acting in their best interest. That's why I say we need a budget that's going to put growth and jobs on the table and ensure that we alleviate the cost of living, don't worsen it. And so the Democratic Alliance now will go back with its GNU partners and go and have a proper discussion about how we can create jobs, grow the economy and fight poverty in South Africa. We are a constructive party. We have great ideas about where we can do more cutting, but also focusing on how we can build more growth. It's now time for South Africa to move beyond the timid tinkering around the edges of cut or tax and start to make the bold, big, brave reforms that South Africa needs if we're going to get our economy out of the doldrums, into the pound seats, if we're able to get our people back into works, if we're able to make sure that every South African has a better future, and that we're relieving the cost of living crisis in the country that is so many people are suffering under. The DA is committed to finding a pro-growth, pro-jobs budget and getting on the table to speak to our pro-growth, pro-jobs medium-term development plan. And that's why I think today is historic and obviously unprecedented, but certainly a very clear indication that no one party now has the ability just to bulldoze anything it wants through. It's going to require the collective efforts of all parties in the government of national unity to make budgets and other things work going forward. This is a sign of a healthy democracy.
Watching. All across our beautiful country, people are joining forces to elect